I woke up this morning, like I've been waking up every morning recently, in the midst of incredible political, social, environmental upheaval. I woke up with hope. Women are on the rise. Now, more than any other time, women are speaking out in response to their experiences of gender violence. And when I'm talking about gender violence, I mean the cradle-to-the-grave experience of millions of women and girls all around the world. Rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment, domestic violence, street harassment. And gender violence is being accomplished by men. Part of what has made this Women on the Rise so exciting has, of course, as we know, been seen in Hollywood. We've noted women in Hollywood addressing their experiences, and we can trace the effort to end gender violence going back over a path of 400 years, at least, through the efforts of Black and Indigenous women. In order to understand this current situation, we have been looking a lot at social media. Social media has been an extraordinary tool for us to get a sense of this serious social issue. And social media has been wonderful because it has democratized media. In so many ways, it's driving mainstream media. And that voices that we haven't been able to hear before are now being centered. In the first time, we are hearing from those voices and understanding the histories that have been suppressed. In order to understand gender violence in North America, we have to understand the role of colonization. From the period of between the 1500s to the 1900s, over 85% of the world's landmass was colonized by a European power. And colonization was largely driven by economic and religious motives. And bringing with colonization was a number of ideas, ideologies, belief systems, again, that were based on religion. And were, as colonization moved across the earth, bringing illness and bringing a worldview that was different from the people that they encountered. A worldview that had some very particular ideas about who was civilized and who was savage. And during that time in Europe, around the same era, there was a lot of things happening for women. Women were stratified along class lines, with women of the higher classes being seen in some regard as being more pure than women of lower classes. In so many ways, wealth for women equated purity, virginity, and in so many ways, for women of the lower classes, poverty was synonymous with promiscuity. And it began this part around good girls and bad girls. The girls, the women that were deserving of protection by men and the state, and those women and girls that were not. We began to see this split. Through colonization, the wealthy classes sent explorers to discover new lands, to get wealth for Europe. And in reading the journals of explorers, it's very telling and very revealing some of the belief systems that the explorers had about the women they encountered. As explorers traveled to what we now understand as Africa, Asia, North, Central, South America, the South Pacific, had very specific ideas about women. The explorers were challenged to see that the women had authority in the communities. That for the most part, communities were working from bases of kinship, which is to say that wherever hierarchies existed, it was not based on gender. Women had autonomy. Women had sexual autonomy. There was a number of different kind of understandings that the explorers struggled with in seeing the power that women had in all of the areas that they'd been. And the explorers wrote about how they beat and raped the women that they encountered. In so many ways, baking in sexual violence before nation states were even created. A big piece around this part was a huge part about heteronormativity and this idea of gender socialization. And that when we are being, through the colonization process, learning about what it means to be a woman and to be a man, the gender binary became a part of this process. It is said in some places that we don't have gender, that we practice it. Every day we get up and we put on our gender. It's a performance to a point, but it's also a part of our socialization in that we are sanctioned to the degree to which we practice our gender correctly. Another critical piece in thinking about colonization, in addition to gender socialization, is the enslavement of Africans. African enslavement as an economic driver of Europe was not a cottage industry. This was developed a huge amount of wealth for Europe. And through that process, significant pieces around African women, baking in the subjugation, the torture, and the rape of African women. As I talked earlier about the stratification of European women, upper class, lower class, what we began to see now was a stratification of women based on class, but also based on the amount of melanin in our skin. And that to be virtuous was to have the least amount of melanin in the skin. Moving toward contemporary times. And we look at media representations, where we see over and over again that part of what it means to practice our gender for men is to have authority over women in some regard. There are 4 ways that men interact with the issue of violence against women. 1 is to use power and control. One of the key lessons of the colonization process was baking in the practice of power over and control of people and determining who was deserving of protection and who was not. In relation to gender violence and men relating in terms of power and control is to do things in terms of isolation and gaslighting and emotional abuse. The second way that men interface with the issue of violence against women is to be a bystander. Silent bystander in some instances, which is to say they actually know that there's a problem. They see it, they're silent. Maybe they do not address it with their friends or their family. They may not be participating in it, but they're observers, not taking action. The third way that men interface with the issue of violence against women is to be a good guy. Good guy. That's nothing wrong with a good guy. A good guy in this instance is a man who will help an individual woman. Maybe, help her move, maybe loan her money, might go give a guy a talking to. He recognizes that there's a problem, and he, is not necessarily going to take action on it beyond helping that individual. The fourth way that men interface with the issue of violence against women is to be an activist. An activist is a man who's decided that he has stake in the effort to end violence against women. He may have witnessed his mother experiencing abuse. He may know that violence and gender violence happened in his family with another relative. He may have friends. He may have been, gender violence may have been invisible to him for most of his life, and he became attuned because Hollywood's now paying attention. An activist is the man who decides, I have a stake in this, and begins to take action. I have had the privilege over the last 30 years to talk to thousands of men about gender violence. Every 6 days, a woman in Canada is killed by her male partner. On any given day, 1 in 5 children has witnessed their mother's abuse. 1 in 5 children in a classroom has witnessed their mother's abuse. We have, in so many ways, an epidemic. It's been baked in to our culture. It's been baked into all of our interactions. And in talking to men over the years, what I've heard is that they're trying to find a way to enter into this. How can I step up and take action? Recognizing that in doing so, they would be violating the so-called bro code. Recognizing that there is social sanctioning around that, because that is not what you do when you're practicing your gender correctly. And so the taking action in terms of the relationships, building more awareness for themselves, taking action within communities and within the larger society is something that many men are doing today. Many brave men are recognizing that they have a stake in this, that this matters to them, that the future of us as a species is to look at these very human relationships, to look at it in a very personal way, and to own a role. I started by saying that this was a time of hope. And I think about all of us, as women right now, who are, in so many ways, continuing and standing in our power and using our voice, pushing back on what has been historical oppression, challenging ourselves to take action and to support each other. It is an exciting time. And in the long history of resistance by, as I mentioned before earlier, Indigenous and Black women through colonization and resisting the sexual violence that was a part of the relationship through colonization, that the front line has been there, the very beginning. And today, each and every one of us is beginning to recognize that we also have a stake, that this matters to all of us in some regard, and that the front line is here at our feet. Thank you.